Dave Ward and Friends is proud to be supported by Sonic Automotive. My family has driven a Sonic Automotive car for 12 years, and I know they're the best in the business. Whether it's purchasing a new or pre-owned car or servicing your current vehicle, let Sonic Automotive be your trusted car guides. Start looking for your new car at soniccars.com. Well, Houston, we've been through a lot together. We started in radio 60 years ago. It was such a great gig, my father cautioned me against going into this thing called television, but we did it, and we had a pretty good run. We even went from black and white to color TV, then to high definition. I keep hearing about streaming and digital, and, well, it's a chance to reconnect with my friends and viewers and share stories from our times together throughout these last 6 decades. What do you say, Houston? Let's do this. Hello, friends. I'm Dave Ward, and welcome to Dave Ward and Friends. This is a series of casual conversations with people I have met and friends I have made in my 60 years of broadcasting radio and television news in Houston. I'm very proud to have today the man who hosts the top-rated sports talk show in Houston on 610 AM, Sean Pendergast. Sean, thank you so much for being here, buddy.
Yeah, Dave, it's great to be here. It's an honor to be here. I know this podcast, I've seen who else you've had on this on these previous episodes so far, so it's quite an honor to be on this list and to be here in the Dave Ward building. This is great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Tell me, how did you get started? You've done a lot of other things, too.
I have.
How did you get started in radio, in the sports radio?
Yeah, well, I was a radio junkie growing up. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and before there was the internet, and so I was kind of a radio junkie. And sports talk radio was not a huge format back then, but I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and there was happened to be a sporce talk show on just for a half hour a night. Now you can find it 24 hours a day, sports talk radio. Back then, half hour a night. And I used to listen to that. I used to call into it when I was 10 or 11 years old, and you had to be 18 years old to call in, so I'd try to be disguising my voice and things like that. So I was a real sports junkie and a radio junkie, and I did some radio in college as well. I moved to Houston in 1994, right after I graduated from college, and I always wished I'd gotten into radio after college, but I didn't. I got into sales and got married, had a family here in Houston, and was very successful in my sales career. But that radio itch was always kind of there, in the background. So I continued throughout the late 90s. I became a Sports Radio 610 listener here in Houston. So I was a listener to the station that I work for now. And I became a caller to their station. I would call and give my takes on what was going on with the Rockets or the Astros or whatever. And listeners to this podcast who are sports fans will remember there was a radio show here called The Jim Rome Show. Very successful, nationally syndicated radio show. So I started, and very caller-driven show. So I started calling that show in a sort of an edgy format where a lot of yelling when you call in and things like that. So long story short, that was a show that had almost a contest each year for who the best caller was. And I won that 5 times from 1997 through 2007. And so I was fairly known as a caller in the sports talk radio world, believe it or not. I actually gained some notoriety calling radio shows. So you fast forward to 2007, I'm in my late 30s, was very successful in my sales career. And one day in February 2007, I was living in Chicago at the time. I'd been promoted a few times. I was vice president of sales for a telecommunications company. And I found out on February 23rd, 2007 that I was losing my job because our company was getting bought. And so I sent an email to a friend of mine who was back here in Houston, who was working for Sports Radio 610 at the time, really just trying to help another guy who was losing his job get a job in radio sales. And kind of joking around in my email, said, hey, carve out a couple hours for me on the weekend. Maybe I can now live my radio dream because I'm getting fired from my sales job. And that person, his name's Chance McClain, called me up when he got that email and said, were you serious about getting into radio? Because some of us here at Sports Radio 610 are actually leaving to start another station here in town. And at the time, it was the 4th sports talk radio station in town back in 2007. And he said, no, I was just joking around. He said, well, your name came up to maybe give radio a try because we know all the stuff you did on the Jim Rome show as a caller. We thought, you're not classically trained in doing radio, but maybe it'd be kind of fun to give it a shot. We can do something different. And so that day, that call came as I was sitting in my driveway after getting fired. I was in the middle of getting divorced. It was in Chicago, so it was negative 11 degrees outside. It was a really low time for me. And out of nowhere, that call came to get a job offer in my late 30s to try radio. And I had to move back to Houston to do it from Chicago. I had to leave my 3 kids, who are all adults now, in Chicago with my ex-wife up there to give this a try. But the fact that I got that call at a really low time for me probably caught me at a time where I was willing to take a risk like that to try radio at age 38. So I told myself, I said, you know what, I'll give this 3 months. I'll move back to Houston. I'll give this 3 months. And if I'm not very good at it, I'll just move back to Chicago and get back into sales. But I would have hated myself if I was getting a chance to live my dream at age 38 and I said no to it. So I said yes. I moved back here in 2007. And 14 years later, I guess I was pretty good at it because 14 years later, here I am. So, and that was with a different station. Now the fact that I'm working at Sports Radio 610, I moved over there in 2014. That's the station I kind of, my formative years here in Houston in the mid-90s, that was the station I listened to, and now I'm doing the morning show on that station, so it's really a dream that I'm living out right now.
Yeah, you're on from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Radio 610.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said you first came to Houston in 1994?
That's right. Yes. So you remember that. Those were fun days back in 94 and 95.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone who has been in Houston at that time will never forget those 2 back-to-back championships.
Yeah.
And we had a guy on Channel 13. They were down in one series like 3-1. Mm-hmm. And he came on the air and he said, if the Rockets pull this out and win, I'll shave my head. Well, they did. And he did too.
Yeah.
Shaved his head right there live on the air.
Did he have a nice head of hair?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Well, it's grown back now.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget the words from Rudy Tomjanovich after they won that championship series.
Yeah.
He said, never underestimate the heart of a champion.
Amen. Yeah, it was, I moved here in between the 2 championships, so I quickly became a Rockets fan when I moved here. And I remember when I moved here, that second year, they weren't as dominant as they were the first championship during the regular season. You remember they were a 6 seed going into the playoffs. They were all upsets that year in the playoffs with the Rockets. And that was one of the coolest postseasons of any team that I've ever rooted for. The fact that they beat the 4 best teams in basketball that year to win that championship. And that's been one of the real thrills for me. I mean, to get into radio, like I said, I was a listener. I consider myself still kind of a fan with a microphone more than I do a polished radio host, And that's been one of the real thrills for me, is the chance that all these people that I grew up rooting for, or even in my adult years rooting for, you get to meet a lot of those people now, and you get to learn their stories and talk to them, and even interviews like this, sitting down with you. You've been in my living room for years and years and years when I moved here. So this is really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate you being here to talk with me about sports and Houston radio. I got into radio in Tyler, Texas.
Yep.
When I was like 19 years old. And the station, my name is David Ward.
Yep.
But the station manager, Ed Smith was his name, he said, we're going to put you on the air as a disc jockey from 5 to 7 in the evening. But you can't go on the air as David. That's too biblical.
Too formal. Too biblical.
He said, shorten it to Dave. That's more jaunty. Sean, I didn't even know what jaunty meant at that time.
I'd never heard the word jaunty before.
But I would have called myself whatever they wanted, to get on the air. I made $1.25 an hour.
Yep.
2 hours a night, $12.50 a week.
Spinning the hits.
Oh boy. Yeah, and I did spin a lot of hits. The station was then bought by another guy named Harry O'Connor. He moved from Sherman and brought 2 disc jockeys with him.
Yeah.
And that's when they moved the radio station in Tyler from out in the same building with the TV station, Channel 7 in Tyler. They moved it right down on Broadway, the main street in Tyler, with a big plate glass window with the disc jockey sitting right there. People could walk by and watch the disc jockey spin the records.
You feel like you hit the big time at that point.
Well, yeah, just about. I had a heck of a time getting the East Texas twang out of my voice. I grew up in Huntsville. I was born in Dallas, but I don't tell many people that down here. But I grew up in Huntsville, and I was really East Texas, and had a high, squeaky voice. Well, this consultant came to Tyler, and he told me, you've got to deepen your voice. He says, when you're driving your car, whenever you stop at a stoplight or a stop sign, anything, just take a deep breath and exhale. Real hard like that. And it worked. It stretched my vocal cords to where my voice became much deeper than it was before, yes.
I've been trying to get my voice deep for years.
Well, that's what he told me. Just breathe out real hard when you're driving, yeah.
So when I stop,
your vocal cords,
just while I'm driving, okay.
Yep.
I've been trying to do that for years. I thought I'd have to smoke like 3 packs a day or something like that to get my voice deep. So I can just do that. So I can just do that just by doing some exhale exercises.
Well, you could try it. It worked for me.
Okay.
And I had to go in that station, the recording room, and I would read wire copy or newspapers or anything.
Right.
And then listen back to it to get that East Texas twang out of my voice.
Yeah.
And that took quite some time.
Really?
Before I was able to enunciate and pronounce words as they should be and not in that East Texas twang.
Yeah.
Which I had a real bad case of.
I can't even imagine you with an East Texas twang.
Well, when I was young, that was me.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about sports.
Yes.
What do you think about the current situation with the Houston Texans and the quarterback controversy? What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on there, obviously. It was already, even before all the legal entanglements that Deshaun finds himself in right now, it was already a kind of an unprecedented situation that a quarterback his age, his skill level, who had just signed a huge contract back in September, record-setting contract, would want to be traded 5 months after signing a contract like that. Now you add in all the things going on in the, I guess, potentially in the courts. I mean, they're all lawsuits right now, and they could turn into, they could turn into a trial. It could turn into settlements. I think, it's. I think the legal part, as far as prognosticating how that's going to play out, that's something I stay away from, and certainly stay away from on my show, just because that's a dangerous game to get into, because we don't know everything that went on. I think what we talk about quite a bit, Dave, with respect to that on our show, is the football impact of it, which is the Texans were ready to trade Deshaun Watson before this all happened, and they were going to trade him to try to get a bunch of draft picks and try to really rebuild the team, and that's going to be put on hold, it would appear. They're not going to be able to move him anytime soon. And I think other teams are understandably kind of taking a cautious approach with it. They don't want to trade for him, and then he gets suspended for the year next year. There's still so many things that can happen with it, but it's just so crazy to think. And it's really not just the Texans. I mean, it's the Rockets and to some degree the Astros. It's really weird to think, 2 years ago, we were on top of the world here in the sports world, you know? I mean, the Astros had made a couple World Series. They won one in 2017, and they came within a few outs of winning another one in 2019. And the Texans were winning a bunch of games, and Deshaun Watson was setting the world on fire, and the Rockets were making deep playoff runs with James Harden. And now I've never seen anything like this, where the three major teams in town have all just not just fallen off, but had stories that rule the day, not just in Houston, but around the world of sports. You know, you turn on ESPN at any given time over the last year, and if the lead story isn't DeAndre Hopkins getting traded, it's the Astros sign-stealing scandal, and it's the Texans and all this Deshaun Watson stuff, and the Rockets with James Harden wanting to get traded and eventually getting traded. I've never seen anything. Forget about being around it and covering it on a day-to-day basis. I don't know that I can ever remember, as a sports fan, a city where the teams went from, way up here, near the tippy top to just soap opera drama bottoming out in such a short period of time. Now, it's from a radio host perspective, it's been really good for radio because there's a lot to talk about. But I'm a fan too. I want the teams to do well. I'd rather have the teams doing well and maybe the topics be a little more run-of-the-mill and mundane than the teams all losing, and have these topics be things that are just unprecedented. But it's been good for listenership, but I don't think it's probably been good for alcohol sales around town as well, as everybody tries to deal with all the issues with these teams. But I've never seen anything like it across all these teams.
Me neither.
Yeah.
And this Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
All these cases against him are civil court cases. No criminal charges have been filed.
Criminal investigations. There's a few of the plaintiffs have gone to the police, but the police have been pretty quiet about whatever investigation is going on. So yes, as you and I are talking right now, they're all in the civil court. And I think the thing that sort of lurks in the background, I mean, Deshaun's kind of battling this on three different battlefronts. There's the civil, which you just mentioned. There's the criminal, which is nothing filed yet. No charges against Deshaun, but that still sits out there. And then there's the NFL, which could suspend Deshaun Watson, even if he's not convicted or even if he's not found liable in these civil cases. The way the NFL works is they're going to run their own investigation. And if they find enough there to where he's just done some things that is what they call conduct detrimental to the league, doesn't have to be criminal in nature or even something that makes him liable in a civil court. If they just feel he's engaged in some things, and he's already admitted to some things that aren't criminal in nature, but maybe kind of run contrary to the branding that the NFL would want, where they don't feel it's the behavior that they would want one of the faces of their league, which he undoubtedly is when he's a player. He's a great player. Then the NFL could suspend him. And I think a lot of people think the NFL is, at the very least, going to, I don't know this to be the case, but I think if you're looking ahead, I think there's a lot of thought that the NFL, at the very least, may suspend him a few games just to send a message, that kind of thing. Just say, hey, you got to take care of your business a little, can't be so sloppy with your business.
Suspend him for just a few games, as opposed to like a whole season.
Correct. Now the whole season is still in play too. There's a lot of things that still need to play out with this.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's like no other story that I've ever covered before, and in no small part because it runs contrary to everything that's been that we've learned about Deshaun publicly. He's always been somebody who's great image, very charitable. One of the big thrills of my radio career so far was 2 years ago, year and a half ago, during the 2019 season. I had a chance to do a sit-down conversation, kind of like you and I are doing right now, with Deshaun for about an hour up at our station where we invited some VIPs up. It was sponsored by Verizon. That's one of his sponsors. So our lounge that we have where we do things like this, it's the Verizon Lounge. And so they chose me to sit down and do the conversation with him where I interviewed him about his life and his upbringing and things like that. And he was great in that conversation, but I think you can tell a lot about athletes and celebrities by how they conduct themselves when they're not in front of a crowd, when the cameras aren't on. And he couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more cordial, more easy to work with, more inquisitive about me, genuinely curious about radio and things like that. So I think it's disheartening to a lot of people what's going on right now. Just even if Deshaun is not liable for what he's being accused of, at the very least, there's some there's some things that he's admitted to through this process that I think are just disappointing to a lot of people throughout this. Probably a lot of parents who've bought Deshaun jerseys for their kids and things like that, where for better or worse, whether they want it or not, athletes are definitely held on a pedestal.
True.
And so, so I think it's certainly at the very least disappointing to a lot of people. And once we learn what the truth is with all of it, then who knows where the emotions go from there with it.
You mentioned that he signed a huge contract here, but then wanted to be traded.
Right.
Do you know why?
I think a lot of it had to do with in general, the way the team has been kind of run over the last year and a half. The team fired their general manager back in 2019. They made Bill O'Brien, who was the head coach at the time, the general manager also. And Bill O'Brien proceeded to make a lot of trades and a lot of moves with the team that at the time people, even the most novice of football fans, said, why are you doing that? They traded DeAndre Hopkins for a second-round pick and a player who was kind of washed up. They traded a bunch of their draft picks for a left tackle. They made a lot of moves. I mean, if Texan fans are listening to this, they don't need me to list all the moves. They're listening to this while they're driving. I'm afraid I'm going to make them drive off and have to pull over by listing all the moves. They made a lot of bad moves, and it was not well run. And I think maybe the final straw with Deshaun was when they went to replace Bill O'Brien as the general manager and the head coach. It seems like Deshaun was led to believe he would have some involvement in that process, like his input, or at the very least he would be kept abreast of what the team was thinking along those lines. And when they hired Nick Caserio, this general manager, as the story goes, it seems like Cal McNair, the owner, and Jack Easterby, the executive vice president of football operations, kind of just ignored the input of everybody else who was part of that process and flew up to New England and went and picked up Nick Caserio and brought him back. And Deshaun found out, like the rest of us did, that Nick Caserio was going to be the new general manager on Twitter. That's how he found out. He found out on social media when it seemed like this was a process where he was at the very least going to be kept abreast of what was going on. So I think it was never, like a lot of things in life, Dave, it's never just one thing. It's a litany of things, and then there's a straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah. And if you just look at the timing of everything, the straw that broke the camel's back seemed to be Deshaun's lack of involvement in some of these decisions that really affect his future quite a bit. Yeah.
At Sonic Automotive, we went from happy guests to happy owners. I felt right at home during the whole process. If my home only had a bigger garage for all those cars. Sonic Automotive has 13 stores in the Houston area, providing you 10 vehicle brands for new sales and services. Visit soniccars.com to find your new car. Dave Ward and Friends is proud to be supported by Sonic Automotive. Let Sonic Automotive be your trusted car guys. Visit soniccars.com to find the location near you. What about our Houston Rockets? What are they going to do? They just seem to be.
They're going to rebuild. They've now had complete turnover within the organization, with Tad Brown leaving as a CEO recently. Just since October of last year, they've now lost their CEO, their general manager, their head coach, and their entire starting five from last year's playoff team. So this is it came about differently than how the Texans arrived where they are right now, but a similar sort of precipitous fall into the abyss, where now they're completely on a rebuild now. And we haven't experienced that with the Rockets in a long time. No. Even though it's been a while since they won a championship, they've still. I don't know if people in Houston that are thirsty for titles only realize how great the Rockets have been for the last 25 or 30 years. I mean, they haven't won a championship since 1995, but they've been competitive almost every season since then. And this season's just very, very different. So it's one of those things Rocket fans are going to have to be a little bit patient. And I don't know, to me, Dave, the interesting thing about that is, and this obviously is a much bigger picture thing, but Tillman Fertitta bought that team back in 2017, I want to say. And they were great his first season. They almost won a championship his first season. But I always wonder, and Tillman's the only one that knows the answer to this, and maybe he doesn't even know the answer, but I always wonder if he had known that it was going to fall off that quickly, that within 3 years they would go from being one of the best teams to one of the worst teams, if he still would have bought the team. And then you factor in the other element that, there was a pandemic right in the middle of it too.
Yeah.
And nobody's business got impacted more than the restaurant and hotel business.
And the travel industry.
And the travel industry. And that's Tillman's, that's his literally his bread and butter. That's, hotels, casinos, restaurants, all these, and not just here in Houston, but all over, certainly all over the country and probably all over the world too. People not able to go. These restaurants that were shut down for months and months and months. And meanwhile, he's got a basketball team that now he's that he's got to run too, and that team is falling apart at the seams. So I always think that's an interesting question, is would Tillman Fertitta still have bought the Rockets had he known this is what it was going to look like 3 years from now?
Yeah.
These teams are sort of vanity items for billionaires. They're not necessarily running them because it's the family business. They're billion-dollar entities, so they run them more to be able to kind of puff their chest out and say, hey, I own a team. But it's tough when your core business is restaurants and hotels and nobody's allowed to go in those places for a year.
Really.
Yeah.
And playing sports, baseball, football, basketball, to empty stadiums.
Just weird stuff.
Really?
Weird stuff.
Do you think when they lost James Harden, is that when it all started? Is that when the downfall started?
I think, it's funny. We have this conversation a lot. Like losing James Harden is where they clearly went from being a team that could compete to a team that was going to be, just a non-factor. Like he's one of the best players in the league. But I think, you go back and go, when should we have seen the writing on the wall that things were going sideways with James Harden a little bit? I think things started to go a little bit sideways when he and Chris Paul weren't getting along anymore after the 2019 season. They almost won the championship in 2018. Then 2019 they made the playoffs, but they got knocked out pretty early, and Chris Paul and James Harden weren't getting along. And I think that's when the bricks sort of started to fall out of the wall, because then they had to trade Chris Paul. They trade him for Russell Westbrook, he's friends with James, but he's not really a fit basketball-wise, and then the team just wasn't as good. So I think that's when the downfall started a little bit, but trading James is where you go from, it's kind of a downfall to, falling into the Grand Canyon kind of thing. So James was a great player, probably the most polarizing player that I've covered in town, not because of anything he did wrong off the court, just because I think James is perceived sometimes to be a little aloof. Maybe at times he doesn't try the hardest on defense, that sort of thing. That bothers people. But I don't know that I've ever, forget about covered as, a media member in this town, I don't know if I've ever watched, as a basketball fan, a better player offensively, scoring the basketball. James Harden is one of a kind.
Yeah, he truly is.
Yeah.
I've seen him in games, he'd score 40 points,
50, 60 points. Yeah. I mean, and not just score 40 points. You'll appreciate this as an old stat guy, he would have given you writer's cramp with that stat sheet back, because he wouldn't just go get you 40 or 50 points. He'd get 12 rebounds. He'd get 13 assists. He was the beginning and the end with everything that they did offensively for those teams. Just a great basketball player, a bit of a strange bird, just kind of personality-wise. Super intelligent, just a really smart basketball player too. But I think some Rocket fans, even at the height of his powers here, at the height of his popularity, when he was winning the MVP of the league here, I think there's still Rocket fans that were like, well, he's never won a championship like Hakeem. That's the thing. In this town, you're always going to be compared to Hakeem Olajuwon.
Yeah.
He's the Hakeem Olajuwon and Nolan Ryan and Earl Campbell. Those guys everybody's chasing those guys in this town. The 334s.
When the Astros traded Nolan Ryan, this was, I don't know, years ago. Dr. John McMullen was the owner of the team.
Yeah.
And he said Nolan was too old, over the hill, so he sent him to the Texas Rangers, I think. Whereas Nolan lives, just about 20 minutes from the Astros.
Alvin,
Well, he would fly back and forth to Dallas. But anyway, when it was announced that Nolan Ryan had been traded, I went on the air that night with a commentary, and I labeled it, "This is a personal commentary." And I directed it straight at Dr. John McMullen. Said, "Dr. McMullen, you have traded away the greatest baseball player Houston Astros ever had, Nolan Ryan. And worse than that, you traded him to the team in Dallas." I said a few other things about this was a bad deal and it shouldn't have been done. And then I said, "Dr. McMullen, you have proven yourself to be nothing but a Yankee carpetbagger. Come down here to our city to destroy our team, and we don't need you here anymore. Marvin Zendler and I will come up with the money to buy the team from you and get you out of town. We just don't want you here." Well, the phones rang off the wall when I got down to Kay's bar, where I used to go every night after
Sure.
I'd get off the air. Everybody in this gave me a standing ovation for that. Well, I come to work the next day, and the station manager came over to me, to my little workspace, and he said, "You're going to have to go on the air and apologize." I said, "Well, I labeled it a personal commentary." And he said, "I don't care how you labeled it. To Dr. McMullen and the Astros, it was a personal attack. And they are demanding that you apologize for that. They've been calling here telling us all of the charitable things that Dr. McMullen has done for the city and blah, 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 blah." So I had to go on there that evening at 6. And I basically repeated the commentary that I did the night before. But at the end, I said, "But Dr. McMullen, I want to apologize for calling you a Yankee carpetbagger. I should not have done that." And
Just that one little sliver you apologize for.
And let it go at that. And
Was that enough? Was that good enough?
And that seemed to work. Yeah, that seemed to be enough for the station management. I don't know if it was enough for McMullen or not.
Was that? How often did you do that? How often did you inject inject your opinion into things?
Very rarely.
So that popped with people. I mean, not only did they agree with you, obviously, but there were probably people sitting down at their TV that night and going, "Oh my God, listen to." It's one thing if I get on the air and do that. I do that every day. I scream into a microphone and I give these opinions. That's our format. But your format is to report the news, tell the news. You know, you feel like a family member to people, right? I mean, they see you back then 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. every single night, and for you to all of a sudden go off the page like that had to be jarring to people.
Well, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
And obviously, Dr. McMullen didn't appreciate it.
Him most of all, right?
Well, it seemed like I had a line in there about him being a naval architect, which I said, apparently the man designs belly buttons. And that didn't go over very good either. But oh boy,
is that on YouTube anywhere? I need to see this.
Probably not. This was so many years ago.
It's got to exist somewhere.
Let's talk a little bit about the Astros.
Okay.
They started off like a house of fire. Mm-hmm. Won 6 out of the first 7 games.
That's right.
And then they, lost 6 out of the next 7 or something like that.
Yep. And it's a sign of the times, Dave. A lot of the reason why they went through that losing streak was because they lost half their starting lineup to COVID protocols.
Yep.
Turns out Jose Altuve actually had COVID. He was in between vaccines, or in between the 2 shots. He caught the virus, and then so there were a handful of other players who, just because they were near him, contact tracing, they had to sit out for a few days, and they happened to be really good players. Alex Bregman and Yordan Alvarez, and some really important players. So I think they're going to be fine. It's a long season. It's a 162-game season, and I don't think they're going to be as good as they were during that peak period of 2017 through 2019. but they still got some really good pieces on that team. You know, it's ironic because if you had said back in January of 2020, January 13th, 2020 was the day that baseball announced their punishment for the Astros for the sign stealing scandal.
Oh, yes.
And so that same day is when they fired Jeff Luhnow and A.J. Hinch as the GM and the manager, and they announced the punishment, and they took a bunch of draft picks, important draft picks from the Astros, which was really painful because they had kind of emptied their farm system in trades to get guys like Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole and Zach Greinke, all really good trades, but you don't make those trades if you're Jeff Luhnow thinking, well, I'm going to make these trades, and then in a year we're going to get punished for sign stealing, like that. So they had already emptied their farm system by trading away all their prospects to get these current day pitchers, and now all of a sudden baseball was hitting them with all these sanctions where they're firing their manager, firing their GM, and they have no draft picks. So if you had said back in January of 2020, which of the three teams, the Astros, the Rockets, or the Texans, on that day, which one is going to be the one that's going to fall off the quickest? You would have said the Astros, because they just had to fire one of the best GMs in baseball and one of the best managers in baseball, and they got all the draft picks taken away from it. You would have said, boy, the end is near for the Astros here.
Yeah.
Texans are going to be fine. They got Deshaun Watson, and the Rockets are going to be fine. They've got James Harden, and it just goes to show you how quickly things can change. Here we are 15 months later, and the Astros aren't as good as they were back in 2019, but they're still pretty good. I still think they're going to be competitive, and I think they got a good chance to be a playoff team. And the Rockets and the Texans are at the bottom of the barrel now. So it's fun. It's nice having a full season of baseball back. It's nice being able to go to games again and things like that.
The sign stealing scandal.
Yeah.
It seems to me like every team in Major League Baseball steals signs.
Right.
How did the Astros get caught doing it?
Well, they had a former player named Mike Fiers, kind of rat them out, if you will. He was a pitcher on the team back in 2017 and 2018, and he's since moved on to the Oakland A's. And he went to a writer for a website called The Athletic and said, hey, I guess he had a guilty conscience about him knowing that it was going on, because it negatively impacts pitchers, obviously, if the hitters know what pitch is coming. So I guess as a fellow pitcher, Mike Fiers was feeling, carrying a lot of guilt around all these years that he played for a team that was stealing signs. So he went to The Athletic, this journalist, journalist with The Athletic, and they wrote a big investigative piece on the whole thing. And so then Major League Baseball had to go do their own investigation of it. And so that was the genesis of the Astros getting caught. But you're absolutely right. There's other teams. There's 100% other teams that are doing it. And I think I'm going to sound like a Houston homer when I say this. I think baseball knows there are other teams that are doing it. Look, the Red Sox and the Yankees got caught doing other things, not banging on a trash can like the Astros were, but they got caught doing some things. The Red Sox got caught using an Apple Watch to steal signs, like the runner on second base was using an Apple Watch to communicate to the dugout, communicate signs to the dugout, and they got caught doing that and got a slap on the wrist, and the Yankees got caught doing some things, got a slap on the wrist. There is part of me that feels like, because the Astros aren't one of those blue blood franchises, like the Red Sox or the Yankees or the Dodgers, those long time, multiple World Series winning, big market blue blood teams, that the Astros were sort of the perfect sacrificial lamb, I guess, maybe, to go, okay, we need to send a message to everybody else that this is unacceptable. We can hit the Astros. It's just Houston. It's not New York or it's not Boston. I like to think that that's what happened, because it keeps that Houston chip on our shoulder, that everybody's out to get us.
It could be.
I know.
But why do you like Houston so much? Why do you stay here?
Because I having grown up in the Northeast, and I love the Northeast, and I love my family. My dad's still up there, my brothers are up there, and everything. There's a friendliness, there is a spirit, I guess, in this city that we, unfortunately, fortunately, we have that spirit. Unfortunately, it feels like every 3 or 4 years, it needs to come to the forefront to raise this city up and somehow get through some sort of turmoil, whether it's Harvey or whatever else it may be. Fortunately, that spirit exists. But I think that just the overall, the friendliness of the people, the spirit of the city, the generosity of the city, and I think Houston's got everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's got everything except snow, which I'm totally cool with. I like that one week that we had snow a couple months ago. I said, this is affirmation. I do not need this. The one thing we don't have, I was reminded that we don't need. So I think it's the spirit of the city. And I think, when I think of the things in the 14, 15 years that I've been doing radio that I'm most proud of, and this is in doing sports talk radio, a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with sports. When Harvey hit, I work for Sports Radio 610, but we're part of a cluster of stations, 6 different stations up there. We have a country station and a Hispanic station and rock and things like that. So there's 6 stations. When Harvey hit, the hosts or the DJs that could somehow find a way to get up to the studios, well, we threw the formats out the window, and all of a sudden we simulcast all 6 stations with the same feed, and we turned into emergency reporting for Harvey 24/7 up there. You know what I mean? And so I'm on there. I'm a guy who my radio stuff that I was used to doing was interviewing athletes and talking about games. Now all of a sudden I'm sleeping up at the station. I'm not going home. We're literally sleeping on couches up at the station. We're up there 24/7, and we're taking shifts on the air to talk to the head of the Red Cross or to talk to the head of the Gulf Coast Regional Blood Center because Harvey, people can't get there to donate blood. So we've got all these different things that are really just so much more important than the score of a game. That stuff, the week of the freeze back in February. I live probably 2 miles from the station. It's, over in Upper Kirby. The station's in Greenway Plaza. Nobody could get around the city for those few days because the roads were all iced. I walked to the station each morning in that cold weather, on the icy streets to get up there and do shows because there were people who needed information. They needed to know how do you get, what do we do to get through these power outages? There were some people that just wanted sports talk to distract themselves from the fact that they were freezing in their houses, and so it's almost, and I know you can relate to this. I know you can. Like there's a civic duty to what we do in broadcasting, and my job is to get paid and talk about the Astros and the Rockets and the Texans. But and this is a long answer to your question of like why I love Houston so much. But it really does. The things I'm most proud of that I've done in my career are largely things that don't have anything to do with sports. It has more to do with the radio part of it. It has more to do with the human interaction part of it. That you touch people and that. And I know you experience this all the time. But people that come up to you and they feel like you're part of their family because you spent 50 years with them basically, coming into their living rooms. And when people come up to me and they say, I really love your show because I have a job where I'm in the car all day and I really don't like my job very much. But boy, when I listen to you and Seth Payne is my co-host, former Texan, former Houston Texan, and when they say, you guys provide a distraction for me that really helps me get through my day. That's the thing that's the coolest part about the job to me. It's not giving, it's cool. I love getting to give my opinion on things. It's a fun job, it's not really work. I'm talking about sports, and when I watch a game at night, that's part of my job now, which is really fun. But when people come up to you, and I know that because that was me for 15 years, you know what I mean? Like before I got into radio, I was that person driving around selling phone systems and going, man, I wish I wasn't selling phone systems for a living. I can't believe I got to pay this bill or that bill. All the things, the weight of life that's on you. That was my distraction with sports talk radio. So now for me to get to be that distraction for people is a really cool thing. And even the guests, like the sports guests are great, but people ask me, what's your favorite interview that you ever did? We were at the Super Bowl 5-6 years ago in Phoenix. We go every year and they have Radio Row there where, you're doing your show from this convention center, and it's just all they bring guests by all day long, different guests, and they're all famous people. Most of them are football people, this Hall of Famer, that Hall of Famer. That day, one of our guests was a guy by the name of Rob O'Neill, who shot Osama bin Laden. That's his claim to fame, is he was the guy who shot Osama bin Laden. And so we got him as a guest. John McClain got him as a guest for us, because John was walking Rob and his dad around Super Bowl. He was a guest of the NFL for the Super Bowl. And John said, "Hey, I'm bringing Rob O'Neill over. He shot Osama bin Laden." And he called me during a break and said this. I said, "You're bringing him over now?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, you can do an interview with him." And I said, he said, "Do you want me to bring him over?" I said, "Absolutely." And then he sits down at the table, and I'm thinking to myself, we're in a break, and Rob O'Neill's sitting there, and we're getting ready to come back from break, and I'm thinking to myself, what do you ask the person who shot Osama? What's the first question for the person who shot Osama bin Laden? And you've probably done dozens of interviews like this, so you're a seasoned pro. The hardest question I ever had to think of up to that point was, why did you throw the ball on third down? Now I'm asking, what's the first question that you ask the guy who shot Osama bin Laden? I remember thinking to myself, boy, this is a lot of pressure right here. And but not nearly as much pressure as shooting Osama bin Laden, obviously. My first question for him was just, when did you realize that you had changed the course of history? At what point in that room did you realize you'd changed the course of history? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, when the lights came on. Because it was dark in there. They're in there with the infrared and everything else. He said, when the lights came on. I'm like, that's a really cool answer.
Wow.
But those are the types of things, it's strange. I'm a sports talk show host, but it's the non-sports stuff that really kind of gets the juices flowing that I'm most proud of.
Well, and you talk about the spirit of Houston.
Yeah.
I said on the air, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and in my last final newscast on the air, I made the statement that, to me, Houston is the greatest city in the greatest state in the greatest nation in the world.
Amen.
Which to me makes Houston the greatest city in the world. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
Sean, I want to thank you so much for being here with me today. Sean Pendergast, Radio 610 Sports, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday?
Monday through Friday, yep. Monday through Friday, and pregame and postgame for the Texans when that season rolls around.
That's right, yes.
Yep, so I do pregame and postgame for the Texans on their broadcast, which is another incredible honor. So yeah, thank you for having me, Dave. This is a real thrill for me as somebody. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for doing this with me, and
of course, anytime.
I really appreciate it.
For sure.
And I want to thank you for joining me here for Dave Ward and Friends. Buckle your seatbelts, friends. You won't believe the VIP perks that Sonic Automotive is offering you. $500 cash toward a new vehicle, $250 cash toward a pre-owned vehicle, 25% off any repair or service, and more. Thank you, Sonic Automotive, for being the official sponsor of the Dave Ward and Friends podcast. To see the VIP perks they're offering my friends, visit soniccars.com.